Driving down Wesley Drive, James Walker glanced at the 11 houses leading up to his own. Of those, 8 were his work, framed by Foster Construction Incorporated, where he worked, while the other 3 had been built by Derek Harris, a local contractor and competitor. There was a friendly rivalry between Harris Construction and Foster Construction, and James recalled the time Harris's crew ran out of concrete. Foster's team had stepped in to help, prompting Alan Foster, James's boss, to joke, "The southeast corner's the only one that'll survive the first snowstorm." Derek had laughed it off, but the rivalry lingered, especially during the 4th of July picnics at Jordan Air Park, where the 2 companies competed in softball, barbecues, and horseshoes before ending the day with fireworks. When James saw Harris's black SUV parked in front of his house, its unmistakable Piercy 1 plate on display, confusion struck. Parking in the garage, he stepped out, heading into the house. "Laura, why's Derek Harris here?" he called, his voice sharper than intended. "Living room," Laura replied flatly. Walking into the living room, James froze at the sight. Laura sat on the small couch beside Harris, her expression uneasy, while Harris looked smug, as if he'd already won. Emily and Ryan sat on the long couch, visibly thrilled. "What's going on?" James asked, his tone tense. "James, there's no easy way to say this," Laura began, unable to meet his gaze. "Then don't drag it out. Just say it," James said firmly. "He's got a pool." Emily blurted excitedly. "And a boat," Ryan added, practically bouncing. "He's taking me to Merrily Lake." Harris opened his mouth, but James raised a hand to cut him off. "Don't say a word, Snake." "James, don't make this harder than it needs to be," Laura snapped, her tone defensive. "Oh, I'm the problem now?" James shot back, his sarcasm biting. "There's no need for," Harris started, but James silenced him with a glare. "I said not another word, Snake," James growled. Harris stood, but James was faster, shoving him back onto the couch. Laura screamed, "Don't you dare, James." Harris smirked. "I thought you'd handle this like a man." Before Harris could react, James backhanded him. For a brief moment, James almost smiled at the shock on Harris's face, but that satisfaction quickly faded. His family was slipping away. His daughter preferred a pool. His son wanted a boat, and the cracks in his marriage were too wide to fix. He remembered Emily posing for boys at the Y instead of swimming and Ryan losing interest in fishing trips, leaving James to do all the work. After Laura, the kids, and Harris left together, James sat at the kitchen table, nursing a course. He opened the divorce petition Laura had left behind, scanning its demands. She wanted custody of the kids, $400 per month in child support for each, half their medical and education costs, and a share of the house and his retirement. It was laughable. She'd never contributed to either. But James knew fighting it would be a battle. He forced down a microwave dinner, knowing he needed something in his stomach to absorb the beers. After 2.5 beers, he stopped himself. Laura wasn't worth the hangover, and work still mattered, wife or no wife, kids or no kids. His thoughts drifted back to when he first met Laura. She had been an awkward 18-year-old at an auto parts store, struggling to find the right battery for her Nissan. James had stepped in to help. "Charts are right there," he had said softly. But my car's not on there," she snapped, her frustration evident. And Tweedledum over there won't bother getting off his fat ass to help. James had stayed calm, asking, "What kind of car do you have?" He found the battery she needed, and even offered to install it at her apartment. Tweedledum, the cashier, glared as James carried the heavy battery out. "So, where's the Cardinal?" James asked as they reached his truck. 17th and Jackson, Laura muttered. "Had to walk here." James had driven her home in his F-250 and installed the battery himself. That's when he met her father, Franklin Hayes, who came outside to chat. Franklin had taken an immediate liking to James, learning he was a 24-year-old construction worker who also dabbled in mechanics and enjoyed Coors beer. "Well, son, if you're thinking of dating my daughter, better save your pennies." "Girl never saw a shiny thing she didn't want," Franklin said with a chuckle. Franklin wasn't wrong. By their second date, James had already seen Laura's overflowing closet packed with shoes, boots, and flip-flops. "One pair for every toe, huh?" Franklin joked, earning an eye roll from Laura. Still, there was something about her fire and confidence that drew James in. She was passionate and blossomed during her pregnancies, especially after Emily was born. But the demands never stopped: braces for herself to enhance her smile, gifts to feed her ego, and eventually, an insistence on a vasectomy after Ryan's birth. "No one's cutting on Big James," he had said calmly, rocking their newborn daughter. Laura's maternal instincts had softened her materialism a bit, but not enough to keep their marriage strong. Now, sitting at the kitchen table, James poured a third beer, deciding he needed a lawyer. When he approached Alan Foster about it, Alan's face turned crimson. "That snake." Alan spat. "Exactly what I called him," James agreed. "I should have said something," Alan muttered. "I saw him hovering around her at the picnic. She looked too friendly." James winced, recalling Laura's tied-up shirt and cut-off shorts at the picnic. The memory stung, but he shoved it aside. There was no use dwelling on it. Bigger battles lay ahead. Martha Caldwell, James's lawyer, listened carefully as he explained his situation. She reviewed receipts, bank statements, and meticulously noted Laura's excessive spending habits. After analyzing everything, Martha revised the divorce petition and faxed it to Laura's attorney. "We'll likely end up in mediation," she told James, "but I have to say, it's remarkable you managed to save anything with how much your wife spent, especially since she contributed nothing." "Alan's a good boss," James replied simply. Martha smiled faintly, but her words rang true. The case went to mediation, where Laura fought to keep the money in the house, acting as if they were hers alone. Meanwhile, she made it increasingly difficult for James to see their kids, smugly suggesting that he should have signed her original petition. At the same time, Alan Foster spread the word about Derek Harris's affair with Laura. It wasn't long before building suppliers began refusing Harris construction credit, and Derek's finances began to unravel. Derek's frustration boiled over when his bank delayed a loan for a new subdivision, leaving him furious and desperate. Meanwhile, James's kids grew sullen during their weekends with him, constantly comparing their time together to the fun they had with Derek and Laura. "We could be water skiing if we were with Mom and Mr. Derek," Emily sneered when James suggested a family day at the Y. "Yeah, Dad," Ryan chimed in. "I've even got a boogie board now." As Harris Construction's troubles deepened, Derek bid for a new office building in Raquel Falls, but the board rejected him due to his personal scandal. Adding salt to the wound, James and Alan Foster were part of the winning bid. Derek's mood darkened further when his longtime painter, Tommy Grayson, approached him nervously after a paycheck bounced. "Hey, I've been with you since the beginning," Tommy said, "but I need to get paid." With most of his crew now working for Foster Construction, Derek was forced to cancel a basement remodeling job. Laura, too, began feeling the financial strain when James canceled the joint credit cards. Her attorney, Andrew Blake, demanded payment, and when she tried to use her cards, she discovered they were useless. Her father, Franklin, grudgingly loaned her money but didn't hold back his advice: "You'd better apologize to James." During mediation, David Reed, the mediator, reviewed the petitions and bank records. When Laura smugly mentioned withholding the kids if James didn't sign the original petition, David's tone turned sharp. "So, Mrs. Walker, are the children pawns in this?" he snapped. "It's not like that," Andrew Blake interjected. "Mrs. Walker has expenses." "Mr. Walker also has expenses," David interrupted, "and he has faithfully paid child support. As for Mrs. Walker's expenses, she should consider getting a job." A month later, on James's 39th birthday, he called Laura to ask if the kids could join him for dinner at Benny's Burger Bar. Laura relayed the request to the kids, her voice clipped. "Your dad wants to take you to Benny's." "It's his birthday," she said. James's heart sank when he heard Emily whine. "Do I have to?" Before Laura could respond, James ended the call. Her attempt to leave a cheerful voicemail suggesting another day didn't change the sting. That Friday, Laura waited for James's call to pick up the kids. Emily, irritated, wanted to spend time with her friend Sophia Turner, while Ryan sulked in the corner. By 6:30, when James still hadn't called, Laura tried his number. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service," the recording said. "What?" Laura muttered, trying again with the same result. "Almost ready?" Derek asked, noticing Laura in a dark suit. "James hasn't picked up the kids yet," she replied. "Call him," Derek said irritably. "Great idea." "His number's disconnected," she snapped. "Good," Derek said smugly. "Looks like he's struggling too." "Come on, kids," Laura sighed, slipping into her heels. "We'll drop you off at your dad's." Derek grumbled as they piled into the car. When they arrived at James's house, Laura gasped, noticing a real estate sign on the front lawn. "Come on, we're going to be late," Derek barked, ignoring her protests. He sped off without another word, leaving the kids fuming in the back seat. On the 3rd of the month, as always, Laura received an $800 check from James. The checks never failed to arrive on time unless the date fell on a Sunday or holiday. But James had heard enough. Emily's whining and Ryan's disinterest during the birthday call had pushed him over the edge. For the first time since his mother's death, James cried, sitting alone at his table. The divorce had left him stripped of everything meaningful. Laura had taken the valuables, and most of the furniture had been sold to a consignment shop. Only his recliner and the mattresses remained. Even his kids seemed distant, preferring the life Laura and Derek offered. When James told Alan Foster he was leaving Raquel Falls, Alan cursed, upset to see him go. The two hugged, and some of the crew came to say goodbye as well. "Where are you headed?" someone asked, noticing the travel trailer hitched to James's truck. "South," James shrugged. "I'm tired of freezing in the winters." Martha Caldwell handled the sale of James's house. After Alan had it repainted and recarpeted, the real estate agent confidently listed it for $160,000. James picked up the divorce decree in Oakleaf, Texas. To celebrate, he treated himself to a half-pound burger, spicy fries, and 2 cold beers at Tijuana Jack's. He even indulged in a $50 lap dance from a redhead. Finding work in Texas wasn't difficult. Scanduro Construction hired him quickly, thanks to Alan's glowing recommendation. The pay was steady, and the work was good, but James's nights were long, and the silence weighed on him. Living in his travel trailer, James settled into a routine, working from early morning until 3 or 4 in the afternoon and staying late to clean the job site. One afternoon, Victor Carter, his boss, called out, "James, the day's over." "Uh-huh," James replied, still sweeping. "Wife's making meatloaf and red gravy tonight." "You're coming over," Victor insisted. "Thanks, but I should. Hurts my feelings." "You gonna say no to Annabelle Marie's cooking?" Victor interrupted. "I need to shower," James said. "Then do it." 1217, Ferguson Drive. "Be there," Victor ordered, tossing a piece of paper at him. Reluctantly, James agreed. As he parked in front of Victor's large, homey house, a pang of homesickness hit. The house reminded him of the ones in Raquel Falls, Colorado. Annabelle Marie, Victor's wife, was plump and pale, her French-Canadian roots showing in her round cheeks and kind smile. Victor, lanky and dark, seemed unable to keep his hands off her, touching her shoulder or brushing her hip whenever he walked past. The dinner table was loud, except during Victor's solemn prayer. Their family included 20-year-old Brian, a college student, Madison, a 17-year-old high school senior with dreams of studying biosynthetic engineering, and Ethan, a 15-year-old football player. "Must get it from her mama, not her old man," Victor said proudly when Madison talked about her plans. Brian, quieter than the rest, mumbled about starting her last year of college, hoping to become a teacher. "Miss Johnson inspired me," she said. "She talked about the world outside Texas." "And there ain't no world outside Texas," Victor joked, making the table laugh. James thought of Emily's fleeting childhood dreams: Olympic skier, doctor, meteorologist. "Good teachers are important," he said. Brian turned to James. "Do you have kids, Mr. James?" "I had 2, he replied, his smile fading. "Had," Ethan teased, giggling until Brian smacked his arm. "Divorce," James said quietly. After dinner, James thanked the family and hugged Victor. "Been a while," Victor said. "Since I sat at a family table," James admitted. The next day, Victor kept barking orders as usual but ended work early. James lingered to clean up, secretly hoping for another dinner invite, but Victor didn't return. That night, James went to Tijuana Jack's for a burger and a beer, eating alone at the bar. On Friday, after handing out paychecks, Victor invited James to Ethan's football game. James cheered for Saints Peter and Paul High, even though they lost. Brian, dressed in denim shorts and a jersey, sat close to James during the game, touching his arm and hand casually. The attention surprised him but left him unsure how to feel. Saturday evening, James arrived at Victor's house with a strawberry shortcake. Madison greeted him at the door, and Annabelle Marie accepted the cake with a laugh. "I don't need this," she joked. "Good, more for me," Ethan quipped, earning a laugh from everyone. "Son's got a lot to learn about women," James teased. During dinner, James joined Brian in setting the table. "I'll get the glasses and ice," she said after arranging the silverware. The casual teamwork felt comforting, almost normal. After dinner, the family talked and joked as James cleaned up alongside Brian. Ethan sheepishly brought up the football game. "We played awful, huh, Mr. James?" "I thought you did fine." "The other team just came to win," James said, earning a grin from Ethan. Annabelle Marie's jambalaya was simple but flavorful, with chicken, sausage, rice, and a spicy kick of cayenne. When dessert was served, Ethan cheered, "Yes, strawberry shortcake." James joked, "Don't let him eat it all, Annabelle Marie." On Sunday, James skipped church and football. Feeling restless, he dressed in shorts and a t-shirt and walked around the trailer park. Some neighbors waved, others ignored him. At Oxbow Lake, he noticed a blonde woman sitting alone, looking around as if waiting for attention. When her shoulders slumped in defeat, James muttered, "That's how I feel too." Monday came, and James worked alongside Carlos, finishing trim while painters and electricians worked around them. Midday, Victor approached. "Brian wants to know if you're coming to dinner tonight," he said, his tone sharp. "I guess," James replied, confused by Victor's attitude. "She's only 20. Half your age," Victor snapped. "I haven't done anything," James protested. Victor stared him down for a moment before turning away to bark orders at the sheetrock crew. James left the site, deciding Carlos and his cousin could handle the finishing touches. Meanwhile, Martha Caldwell, James's lawyer, reviewed receipts and paperwork with Laura. "So, $400 a month per child and half of medical and education expenses," she said firmly. "Can't he chip in more?" Laura whined. "The car broke down." "That's not my client's concern," Martha interrupted. "Your financial planning, or lack of it, isn't his responsibility." "Where is your client, anyway?" "He missed Emily's birthday," Laura snapped. Martha remained calm. "He sent a card and a $10 gift card for Benny's Burger Bar." "Emily's braces still aren't fully paid for," Laura huffed. "Mr. Walker has paid his share of every expense, including the braces," Martha replied, sliding a check across the desk. "Thank you, Mrs. Harris. Excuse me, Mrs. Walker." Laura's face reddened, but she said nothing. The conversation ended as coldly as it began. "How can I reach him?" Laura asked, her tone almost pleading. "No," Martha said coldly, not looking up from her keyboard. "Cow. I hope you have kids and deal with someone like you," Laura snapped. Martha stopped typing and looked at her. "Raised 3 on my own after my husband left," she said evenly. "Wonder why he left you," Laura sneered. Martha's expression didn't change. "He found a selfish girl who didn't challenge his ego, bled him dry, and then he tried to come back. But I work for everything I have. I don't rely on spreading my legs to get what I want. Now get out." Later, James picked up his phone. "Hello? Annabelle Marie wants to know if you're coming to dinner," Victor said. "Chicken cacciatore, or her version of it." "I don't think. If you don't come, I'm in trouble." 6 o'clock, okay?" James arrived at Victor's home and parked carefully to avoid blocking the driveway with his travel trailer. Brian opened the door, smiling until her eyes landed on the trailer. "Oh, you're going camping?" she asked. "No, I'm moving on," James admitted. Her smile disappeared, and her eyes filled with tears as she turned and ran inside. Annabelle Marie appeared at the door, looking puzzled. "What's wrong with her?" she asked, brushing it off. "Come on in, James." Ethan had set the table, and Madison was finishing with the glasses. "Brian, dinner's ready," Annabelle Marie called. There was no response, so Annabelle Marie raised her voice. "Antoinette Annabelle Marie Carter. She uses your full name. You're in trouble," Ethan whispered to James. "Don't tell her mine," James joked. "I'll get her," Madison offered. "No, Joe, say grace." "I'll go," Annabelle Marie insisted. When Brian finally joined them, her eyes were red, and she was accompanied by another teary-eyed woman. Annabelle Marie broke the silence. "James, why are you leaving?" "My job's done," James said. "We just started rolling it today," Victor interjected. "My part is finished," James replied. "We're starting Great Oak National Bank the Monday after next," Victor argued. "Mr. James, please stay," Brian whispered, tears streaming down her face as she mouthed, "Please." 5 years later, Laura drove down Roberts Drive, admiring the upscale homes. Stopping at 1809, She noticed James's travel trailer on a concrete pad surrounded by a neat, colorful yard filled with flowers and a decorative wooden wheelbarrow. Adjusting her clothes, she rang the bell. Yes, a voice called. Hi, I'm Laura. Does James Walker live here? She asked, trying to keep her tone light. And you are? The voice wasn't warm. I'm Laura Walker, his ex-wife, she replied, irritated. Does he know you're here? No. The door opened, and James appeared, looking tanned, fit, and confident. His silver-streaked blonde hair and muscular build only emphasized how much he'd changed. Yes, he asked curtly. Hello, James, Laura said, forcing a smirk. Long time no see. Yes. Can we talk somewhere? She asked. Right here's fine, he replied. David. A young blonde woman appeared behind him. Laura blinked. Long blonde hair, green eyes, and a body barely covered by a wrap suggested she'd just been swimming. The woman had a quiet, assured confidence. Take her to the sunroom, the woman said in a soft Texas drawl. Fine. Come on, Laura. James led her through the house, the woman stepping outside to join children splashing in a large pool. Removing her wrap, she dove gracefully into the water. 5 minutes. Start talking, James said, pulling Laura's focus back to him. Really? We were together for 14 years, and this is how you treat me? Laura snapped. Oh, I'm sorry. Champagne? Caviar? Where are my manners? James retorted sarcastically. Now get to it. Emily's getting married on the 9th next month, Laura said stiffly. How far along is she? James asked bluntly. Laura flushed. 4.5 months. He muttered. She wants her dad to walk her down the aisle, Laura said. It would mean a lot to her. Do I have to? James mocked. Like when I wanted to spend my birthday with the kids, and they said, do I have to? No, I won't. Tell her to get Derek Harris. Derek Harris is no longer in our lives, Laura snapped. James's eyes drifted toward the pool. A little girl jumped in, squealing, as the blonde clapped. The girl ran inside, water dripping everywhere. Daddy, did you see me? She cried. I did. Just like a big girl, James said, scooping her up. I'm Lillian. I'm 4, the girl announced proudly, turning to Laura. Hello, Lillian, Laura said stiffly. The blonde reappeared, toweling off. I'm sorry she interrupted, she said with a smile. It's fine, James said, hugging Lillian. Show Mommy that big jump again, okay? Daddy, you have to watch. Lillian said firmly. I'll always watch you, James promised. So why can't Ryan walk Emily down the aisle? James asked. Ryan's in jail, Laura admitted. Do I still have to pay child support if he's in jail? James asked casually. He's still a minor, Laura snapped. But you don't have custody, do you? James said, standing. 5 minutes are up. See you. Really? I came all this way to beg you to be part of your daughter's wedding, and you dismiss me. Laura shrilled. Did I ask you to come? James shot back. No, Emily did. Then maybe Emily should have come, James said, opening the door. Hey kids, you all waterlogged yet? My fingers are bumpy, Lillian said, showing him her hands. That's terrible, James joked, scooping her up again. You seem to be doing well, Laura said bitterly as he walked her to the door. Thanks to no one but myself, James replied, flashing a smile. He shut the door without another word, leaving Laura sweating in the Texas heat as she trudged back to her car, defeated. Inside the kitchen, James joined his wife and the maid, Carmen, trying to figure out what the boys wanted for dinner. Boogers and toes, James joked. Don't get them started, his wife said with a smile. Daddy, I want hot dogs. Logan said. Yeah, hot dogs, echoed Caleb, his twin. I thought you wanted hamburgers, Carmen laughed. I changed my mind, Logan replied. How about spaghetti with hot dogs cut up in it? James suggested. Yeah, the kids shouted in unison. Daddy, you're the best, his wife said warmly, grabbing a pot for the pasta. After dinner and baths, despite the boys insisting that swimming counted as a bath, prayers and bedtime stories followed. Finally, James walked into the bedroom where his wife stood in a t-shirt. Hey, precious, he said, wrapping his arms around her. What did your ex-wife want? She asked, kissing him. To know how I look so good after being stuck with you, James teased. Plenty of protein, she joked back, crawling into bed. Really, what did she want? Emily's getting married next month. She wants me to walk her down the aisle, James said, joining her under the covers. So, we're going to Raquel Falls, she asked. No, we're not going, James said flatly. David, you need to walk your daughter down the aisle, she insisted, resting her head on his chest. I know it hurts, but, she began, her voice soft. James thought back to meeting her at Kennedy Park. He and Brian had dated briefly, but there was no real chemistry. Thankfully, Brian had brought up the truth. David, I love you, but I'm not in love with you, she admitted. Kind of how I feel, James agreed. I care about you, but no long-term romance here. They remained friends, supporting each other through life's challenges. One evening at the park, a Yorkie tangled a jogger in its retractable leash, causing her to fall hard. The dog yelped as it became trapped, and the jogger screamed in pain. James rushed over, helping the jogger and grabbing the snarling dog. Hold your animal and drop the leash, he ordered, untangling the line. The jogger had a swelling knot on her forehead and a broken ankle. Brian, get her name and address, James said. I'm not giving you, the dog owner began, but James snapped her picture and called emergency services. The nearest vehicle is in Wakulla, the operator said. Never mind, I'll take her myself, James said, carrying the jogger to his truck. Brian followed, glaring at the dog owner as she left. Don't worry, I got her picture, James reassured Brian as he strapped the jogger in. Brian grabbed ice from a vendor and held it to the woman's head while James drove her to the hospital. The jogger moaned softly, still unconscious when they arrived at the ER. A nurse and orderly rushed her inside. James debated visiting her later but decided against it. He had worked the next day at Scanduro and his latest foreclosure project. That night, James thought about finding a permanent home instead of living in his travel trailer. While waiting for Scanduro Construction to begin work on the Great Oak First National Bank, he bought a foreclosure in a modest neighborhood. The house was a disaster. Rotting food, smeared feces, broken windows, and concrete in the toilets. James did most of the work himself, using his job to secure materials at discounted prices. While renovating, the house next door went into foreclosure, and James bought that one too. Over time, he acquired 2 more properties on Roberts Drive in a gated community where homeowners had overextended their credit. James sold 3 properties for a reasonable profit and moved into the 4th at 1809 Roberts Drive. By day, James worked for Scanduro. By evening, he renovated houses. His latest project was on Simpson Way, where a previous owner had tragically hung himself after losing everything. The house needed cosmetic updates, gaudy carpets and paint, but the structure was sound. One evening, instead of heading to Simpson Way, James decided to check on the jogger he had helped. At Low Ridge Hospital, he found her room. They cut up my shoe to get it off, she said as he entered. None of them figured out how to untie a knot? James joked, meeting her clear green eyes. She asked what had happened, and James explained about the dog and the leash. As they chatted, James felt a flicker of familiarity but couldn't place her. She mentioned she was studying education at Connolly, and James remembered picking Brian up there a few times. By the way, what's your name? James asked. Ruby Lopez, she replied. Yeah, I know. I don't look Mexican. Anyone you need to call? James asked. No, my mom died last year, and my dad disowned me, she said quietly. James glanced at his watch, realizing he had limited daylight left to work on Simpson Way. He told Ruby he'd visit again and stood to leave. Thanks for stopping by, she said, lowering her bed with a sad smile. As James reached the door, he paused, suddenly remembering where he'd seen her before. Oxbow Lake, he said. Huh? Ruby asked, confused. That's where I've seen you before, James said, smiling. You were sunbathing in a green bikini, James said, making Ruby blush. What do you have to feel sad about? She asked softly. I was happily married with 2 kids, James began. My son was named Logan after my dad or Caleb after my mom's father. My granddad could carve anything from wood. What did you actually name him? Ruby asked, taking his hand. Laura chose James Jr. We called him Ryan. That's a good name. I like it, Ruby smiled. I was named after my dad's brother who died in Vietnam, James added. And your little girl? Ruby asked. Lillian, James said with a soft smile. It was my mom's name, But Laura wanted Emily Christina instead. Do you see them often? Ruby asked. It's been a few months, James admitted. They've got a pool and boogie boards in Raquel Falls. What do they need with their dad? James stayed with her until an orderly brought dinner, surprising them both with a gentle kiss before leaving. The next morning, while working on the bank lobby, his phone rang. David. Ruby's voice came through. James answered, wiping sweat off his face. They're discharging me today, she said softly. I'll be there soon, James promised, informing Victor of the emergency before leaving for the hospital. At the curb, an orderly wheeled Ruby out. James lifted her into his truck, buckling her in. Where to? Home, she said, giving directions to the Spanish Arms Apartments. Halfway there, she remembered her car was still at Kennedy Park. Without hesitation, James drove to the park. She pointed to a 2005 Volkswagen Beetle. Shut up, it's cute, she laughed when James teased her about it. Seeing her plaster boot, James realized she couldn't drive. Okay, I'll drop you off and then drive your car to your apartment, he decided. That's too much, Ruby protested. You can't drive like that, James said firmly. Back at Spanish Arms, James noticed she lived on the 3rd floor. They didn't give you crutches? No, Ruby realized, her voice trembling. How are you going to manage the stairs? He asked. I don't know, she whispered before bursting into tears. Get your key, James said gently. He carried her up to her apartment, set her down, and left to get boxes from a nearby store. What are those for? Ruby asked when he returned. Pack what you need for a couple of weeks. You're staying with me until you can get around, James said. Ruby started to argue but realized she couldn't manage on her own. Your apartment is on the ground floor? It will be yours, James assured her. Give me your car keys. I'll be back. Oh, don't want to help me pack? She teased. No, I've seen enough of women's drawers, James joked, kissing her lightly before leaving. He rented a hitch to tow her car and returned to help her finish packing. Lifting her into the truck, he asked, Ready? Ruby surprised him with a kiss. Thank you, David. At his home, Ruby craned her neck to admire the 3rd-story windows. Oh my, I come here every Christmas, she said. Christmas? James asked. These houses go all out with lights, Ruby explained. Like Clark Griswold? James joked. Who? Ruby asked, confused. Griswold, Christmas Vacation, James said, shaking his head. At the door, Ruby held out her arms. Carrying me across the threshold? She teased. When I do, you should at least have a nice dress on, James quipped, unlocking the door and scooping her up. Inside, Ruby admired the couch. Love this couch. Is this where I'm staying? No, I'll carry you to the bedroom after I bring your stuff in, James said, moving her boxes inside. When he placed her on the bed, she didn't let go. Thank you, David, she whispered, kissing him. You're welcome, James said, standing. Need the bathroom? Right across the hall, she said. James carried her there and waited outside. When she finished, he brought extra pillows and set up an old TV in her room. Later, he cooked her soup and used a rusty cookie sheet as a tray. Over the next 5 weeks, he cared for her, renting crutches and helping her adjust. By the 3rd morning, Ruby was awake and ready for James to carry her to the kitchen. Got your crutches? James asked as he scooped her up. But I like when you carry me, she whispered. James smiled, realizing she had brushed her teeth, and returned to bed just to wait for him. Honestly, I like carrying you too, he admitted. At work, Joe grew irritated with James taking time off for Ruby's doctor visits and therapy sessions. Helen Blake, a lawyer, helped Ruby sue Patricia Coleman, the Yorkie's owner, taking more time from work. James, we all have stuff to do. Can't you schedule this for after hours? Joe complained. When James needed another afternoon off, Joe snapped. More important to have a job, or whatever this is? The next morning, Joe berated James in front of the crew. James smiled, nodded, and walked off the job site. Hey, you're home early, Ruby said, looking up from her textbook. James grumbled, collapsing onto the couch. Do I have an appointment? Ruby asked, alarmed by James's sudden appearance. No, I got run off the job, James said. What happened? Ruby asked, patting the cushion beside her. James sat down and explained the tension caused by his time off for her therapy and his past relationship with Victor's daughter. Joe had enough of my absences and blew up at me in front of the crew. Why didn't you say something? I could have asked someone else to take me to my appointments, Ruby said. But I wanted to take you, James admitted. Why? She asked, looking into his eyes. Because I'm in love with you, he said. Ruby's lips curved into a soft smile. And I'm in love with you, David Arthur Walker, she whispered before kissing him. Now unemployed, James leaned into his growing foreclosure business, fixing and flipping homes. Being his own boss gave him the freedom to take Ruby to appointments and on outings. On one trip to Hogshead, her favorite barbecue spot, James encountered a piece of her past. Hey, Prez, a muscular young man sneered as he approached their table. Oh, hi, Connor, Ruby replied flatly. This your dad? Connor mocked, trying to sit beside her. Ruby blocked him with her hand. No, this is my fiancé, David Walker, she said firmly. David, this is Connor. I used to date him. You're what? Connor scoffed. My fiancé, Ruby repeated, her tone icy. Connor glared at James before Megan, a waitress, called him away. Connor, the ribs are ready. James raised an eyebrow as Connor walked off. Fiancé? You didn't know? Ruby teased, dipping her finger in barbecue sauce and offering it to him. Want to get married the day after Christmas? James licked the sauce off her finger and grinned. Gives me a month to find the perfect ring. Ruby's triumphant smile widened. And time for me to get this cast off. Can you two-step? She asked. I'll learn, James replied. On December 26th, Samuel Barnes of Fellowship Non-Denominational Church performed their lively wedding ceremony. James, having mastered the Texas two-step, joined Ruby in dancing with their guests, as the DJ kept the celebration going. The Hogshead catered the event with its signature barbecue, and the hall was filled with laughter and joy. Brian Carter attended but quietly excused herself to the restroom, where she locked herself in a stall and sobbed. Samuel's son, Elijah, offered her a handkerchief. Seeing others happy can be tough, he said gently. Brian dabbed her eyes. When my cousin got married, I wanted to punch the groom, Elijah admitted with a small laugh. Brian chuckled softly. Sanity prevailed, I take it? Yeah, considering he's a nose tackle for the Connolly Cougars, Elijah joked. Ouch, Brian said, smiling. Why haven't you danced yet? Elijah asked, holding out his hand. Let's go. 9 months later, James and Ruby welcomed twin boys, Caleb David and Logan. 17 months after that, Brian and Elijah had their first child, while Ruby gave birth to their daughter, Lillian. Years later, the Walkers traveled to James's hometown in Colorado to reconnect with his estranged children. I can't believe I'm back, James grumbled as they stepped off the plane in Ben Hoo's. New Texas finally got tired of your ugly face, joked Alan Foster, James's former boss, as he pulled him into a hug. Alan, what are you doing here? James laughed. Less hair, more gut. How about you? Alan said with a grin. I'm good. Alan, meet my family, James said, introducing Ruby and their children. You booked a suite at the Hilton, but you're staying at my house, Alan insisted, grabbing their luggage. Are you sure? Ruby asked. Sure as my name's Alan, he said. After settling into Alan's home, James and Ruby in the guest room, Lillian in Alan's daughter's old room, and the twins on the sofa bed, Ruby gave James a kiss. I'll check on the boys and give you some privacy, she said softly. Love you. Love you too, James replied, taking a deep breath before calling his daughter. Hello? A guarded voice answered. Hey, it's your dad, James said. Who? Oh, Dad, Emily said flatly. We're in town and heading to Benny's Burger Bar at 6. I'd love to see you there, James said. Yeah, sure, Emily sneered. I've got 1,000 of those dumb gift cards to use. James ended the call, scowling as he joined Ruby and the boys. Benny's Burger Bar, 6 o'clock, he announced. And? Ruby asked gently. And she sounded like the same snotty brat she was at 13, James spat. Whenever I expect the worst, I'm rarely disappointed. With my second graders, some are sweet, but others are tough, Ruby said. When I drop my expectations, things go better. James softened. Don't know why I let you talk me into this, he said with a smile as Caleb found a pot of gold in his video game. Because I promised you a special night, Ruby whispered in his ear. You did? James asked. Not here, Ruby giggled as he wrapped an arm around her waist. At 6, James herded Lillian and Logan into Benny's, with Ruby and Caleb just behind. Caleb had already spotted a Porsche 911 outside and wanted a closer look. James scanned the restaurant, his jaw tightening when he didn't see Emily. "She here?" Ruby whispered, taking his hand. "Nope," James said flatly. "Maybe she's stuck in traffic," Ruby suggested. "Traffic? In Raquel Falls?" James shot back. "This town doesn't even know what traffic is." Ruby gently steered the kids to the counter. "So how do we do this?" she asked, trying to distract him. "First, you pick your burger size, quarter pound, half pound, or 1 pound," James explained. 20 pounds? Lillian asked with wide eyes. "Daddy's joking, sweetie," Ruby giggled. "It's 1 pound max. Then you pick bacon, cheese, or both," James continued. "How about half bacon, half cheese?" Logan asked thoughtfully. "Now you're getting it," James said with a smile. "And when it's ready, you head to the toppings bar, over 40 options." "Boogers?" Caleb asked with a smirk. "Caleb," Ruby scolded. "No, those you bring from home," James joked, earning giggles from the kids. "Sounds like you've been here before," the cashier said, smiling. "Used to be my favorite spot," James admitted. 20 minutes later, Emily arrived. She nodded at James before dawdling over her burger order. When she finally sat down, she slapped her tray on the table. "Hi," she snapped. "About 5 months along?" James asked, glancing at her rounded belly. "Uh-huh," Emily muttered, shoving a bite of burger into her mouth. "I'm 2 months along," Ruby offered, trying to connect. "That's nice," Emily said dismissively. "So, Dad, let's get to it." "Your mother says you're getting married this Saturday," James said, struggling to contain his frustration. "Yeah, heard you said. Who cares?" Emily replied. "Well, I came to see you get married, and wanted you to meet your brothers and sister," James said. "Fine," Emily said, gulping her soda. "I'm Ruby," Ruby said warmly, extending her hand. "I'm sure you are," Emily sneered. "That's her name," James said through clenched teeth. "Ruby Walker. This is Lillian." "I'm 4," Lillian announced proudly. "And the big guys are Caleb and Logan," James added. "Guys, this is your big sister, Emily." "Hi," Caleb said hesitantly. "I'm 4," Lillian repeated. "Hi," Logan mumbled. Emily leaned back with a sarcastic smirk. "Oh, I see. You thought I'd be all, oh, hi. Great to see you. Don't worry about ditching me." "No," James replied coldly. "I hoped you'd say, hey, sorry I was a selfish brat who acted like spending time with my dad was a burden, but I've grown up." "Guess we're both disappointed." "Daddy said crap," Lillian whispered to Ruby. "I heard him," Ruby said, pinching Lillian's nose. "And I heard you say it too." "I was just telling on Daddy," Lillian said, giggling. "Don't bother, Daddy," Emily snapped, shoving her tray. The drink spilled across the table. "Don't come to my wedding." "I don't want you there," Emily spat, standing abruptly. "No problem," James said coolly, grabbing the tray to stop the soda from dripping. "We'll drop your gift off at your mother's," Ruby offered gently as Emily stormed out. "Whatever, cow," Emily sneered, shoving the door open. "She said," Lillian began. "And if you repeat it, you'll get a spanking," Ruby warned, her tone firm. As they left the restaurant, Ruby asked brightly, "So, what did y'all think of Benny's Burger Bar?" "Next time, more pickles," Caleb said. "And barbecue sauce," Logan added. James smiled at their enthusiasm, exchanging a look with Ruby as they walked to the minivan. After dropping her and the kids off for ice cream, James drove to the address Martha Caldwell had provided. He double-checked the dilapidated complex before stepping out. Yo, can't park there. "That's my boy's spot," a teenager said, swaggering toward him. "The sign says visitors." "Your boy's name is Visitors?" James retorted, grabbing a wrapped package from the passenger seat. "Hold $5, the kid tried again. "Not gonna happen." "And pull your pants up," James snapped as he headed to Laura's door. "What? Who's there?" Laura's voice came through, harsh and irritated. "It's James. Here to drop off Emily's wedding present," he called. "Yeah, heard the meeting went great," Laura smirked as she opened the door. James thrust the package into her hands. "Where's Barbie?" Laura sneered. "Who?" James asked. "Your little Texas wife," she said nastily. "Go screw yourself," James spat back. Thought you'd traded up, but can't stand it that I did. Great trade, Laura snarled as James turned and walked away. Think I'll keep mine, James said with a smile, ignoring her tirade. On the way back to his van, the teenager whined. About $1? Pull your pants up. You look ridiculous, James snapped, slamming the van door. The kid flipped him off, but James revved the engine, startling him into falling backward. Laughing, James reversed and texted Ruby. When he arrived at Scooter's, Ruby greeted him with a chocolate ice cream cone. Daddy got you a double-dipped double chocolate, she teased. Scooter's got you a sloppy kiss, James replied, planting a noisy one on her cheek. David quit. Ruby giggled as the kids laughed. James's meeting with Ryan went only slightly better. The 17-year-old barely looked up from the table in the visitation room. Thanks for the cheap Benny's gift cards, Ryan sneered. You're welcome, James replied calmly. $10 doesn't buy anything there, Ryan said bitterly. I know. A quarter-pounder, fries, and a drink are at least $14, James said. Then why'd you send it? Ryan demanded. So you'd have to pay a little yourself, James replied evenly. Why'd you even come here? Ryan asked angrily. Honestly, I wanted to see if any of that kid I used to know was still left, James admitted. Saw your sister. She's not the girl who played a tree in her first grade play, smiling and waving at me. You were sunbathing in a green bikini, James said, making Ruby blush. What do you have to feel sad about? She asked softly. I was happily married with 2 kids, James replied, his voice heavy. My son was named Logan after my dad or Caleb after my mom's father. My granddad could carve anything from wood. What did you actually name him? Ruby asked, gently taking his hand. Laura chose James Jr. We called him Ryan, James said with a faint smile. That's a good name. I like it, Ruby said. I was named after my dad's brother who died in Vietnam, James added. And your little girl? Ruby asked. Lillian, James said, his expression softening. It was my mom's name, but Laura picked Emily Christina instead. Do you see them often? Ruby asked. It's been a few months, James admitted. They've got a pool and boogie boards. What do they need with their dad? James stayed with Ruby until her dinner arrived, surprising her with a gentle kiss before leaving. The next day, James got a call from Ruby. They're discharging me today, she said softly. I'll be there soon, James promised, leaving work to pick her up. After driving Ruby home, James worked on reconnecting with his kids. Ryan's legal troubles led James to hire Martha Caldwell to represent him in court. Though Martha's efforts reduced the sentence, Ryan still received 2 years in a medium security facility. James stayed involved, visiting often and offering support. Emily gave birth to a premature baby, Grace Charlotte Foster, who tragically passed away at just 1 week old. James's tears were heartfelt as he sent condolences to Emily and her husband. 7 months later, Ruby gave birth to Olivia Nicole Walker. James was overjoyed by his new daughter, but the loss of his granddaughter haunted him. 3 weeks later, tragedy struck again. Ruby was hit by a speeding pickup truck while waiting for Lillian to return from school. Lillian witnessed the accident, and Ruby was placed on life support. James was stunned when the hospital called. Holding Lillian close, he felt detached, unable to process her sobs. A doctor's words shattered what remained of his world. Mr. Walker, I tried my best. She's in a better place now. James stood frozen until Lillian's small hand tugged his. Can we see Mom? She asked. He knelt and tried to explain. Mommy's in a deep sleep with God in heaven. She might not wake up for a long time. Lillian nodded solemnly. Okay, let her sleep. The baby needs to eat, she said, as if she'd grown up overnight. 3 days later, Ruby lay in her casket, dressed in her wedding gown. James placed his hand on her chest, feeling the absence of her heartbeat. Tears flowed freely as he prayed for one more moment to tell her how much he loved her. At the funeral, Lillian walked to the stand, clutching a piece of paper. My name is Lillian, and I'm 4 years old. My daddy must be in the potty. He doesn't like people to see him cry, she began, her voice bringing tears to every eye. My mom is the most beautiful and strongest woman. If my mom is watching me from heaven, I want her to know I love her and will miss her. My mommy's name is Ruby, and she is very precious to me and my daddy. James ran out to hug Lillian, letting his tears fall freely as she whispered, I'm here for you, Daddy. 2 years later, Ryan was released from prison but fell back into destructive habits. He died in a car wreck caused by drug use, alongside a hired escort. At Ryan's funeral, James didn't speak or console Laura. After everyone left, he placed a single white flower on the grave. "I'm sorry, James," Laura said quietly, standing behind him. "If only I'd kept the family together. My selfishness destroyed my husband, my children, and now my son." James said nothing and walked away. The next time he saw Laura was at her funeral 10 years later. Emily handed him a letter from her mother. "Mom wanted you to have this," she said. The letter contained just 3 words: "I am sorry." In her final days, Laura had sought forgiveness. James folded the letter and kept it in his drawer. That evening, standing on the porch, lost in thought, James's teenage daughter joined him. "I saw the letter," she admitted. "Didn't I teach you not to read personal letters?" James asked, half smiling. "All she wanted was your forgiveness," she said. "She's gone now, so your hate won't hurt her." James nodded, his voice quiet. "I forgave her when I married your mom. I just never told her. Now I can't." "You don't need to tell her. Just tell yourself," his daughter replied. James slept well that night, amazed at his 14-year-old's wisdom. 23 years later, James passed away peacefully. At his funeral, Lillian gave his eulogy. "My name is Lillian. Last time I stood here, I was 4 years old at my mom's funeral. That day, my dad told me my mom was with God and that we'd meet her one day. What he didn't tell me was that the wait would feel like a lifetime. Today, my daddy beat me to it. He never remarried or dated again because, for him, we were his life. He was both father and mother to us, teaching us to live, love, and find happiness. There aren't enough words to describe his kindness and love. Daddy, if you're watching, we all love you. I hope you find your Ruby in heaven." James was laid to rest beside Ruby, with their children standing together near the graves of 2 people who loved each other deeply and were finally reunited forever.